Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon if you're back east. And welcome to the intro to the SATPAC program. So, a couple of things before we begin. Number one is, since you guys are all astute SLPs or aspiring SLPs, you'll probably notice that I have a voice disorder, which began about 50 years ago. So what I like to say before I begin a presentation is that unless something really dramatic happens in the next hour or so, this is the voice you're going to get. So our schedule today will be, we'll go for about 90 minutes or so, and then I'll take questions for as long as you have them. If you have a question, type it into the Q&A box. Okay, let's get started here. Okay, so what is SATPAC? So I would like to start with a story. In the 1990s, I was the Arctic mentor for my school district, which was Fresno Unified Schools. And I know that some of you here today are Fresno State students. So, and that's my alma mater. So welcome. Anyway, so being an Arctic mentor meant that I would be contacted by SLPs who were having difficulty with certain students, and they wanted my help. And what I noticed over and over again when I went out to help them was three things. First of all, a lot of times they didn't have the correct placement for the sound. Another thing was that typically the way they were remediating sounds was using picture cards without any real rhyme or reason other than they were working on their target sound. And the third thing I noticed was that they tended to do everything way too slow. So what I realized was that what I was witnessing was a real disconnect between what our ultimate goal was, which was normal conversational speech, and what they were doing in therapy, which really didn't have all that much to do with regular conversational speech. So that was kind of what got me going to do the SATPAC program. So what is SATPAC? It's an Arctic software program that incorporates the elements of conversational speech, which are co-articulation, natural prosody, and speaking at a normal rate. And then I also incorporated three other things, which were some best practices, which were the use of facilitating contexts, using non-words, and lots of repetitions of correct usage of the target sound. So the way the program works is that the target sound is established, then practiced into, not into, using typically non-words or nonsense words, if you will. Words like beat seek for S and ear nav for the R sound. And then after the student has practiced and developed a consistent motor pattern, then we switch over into real words, real phrases, sentences, and conversation. Okay. So these are the important elements of SATPAC, and I'm going to talk about each one. So, facilitating context. Why would beat seed be a facilitating context for the S sound? Well, the reason is that you're starting with the B sound, which requires no tongue positioning, followed by the E, which gets the tongue wide, and on the back molars, this E, which is what you need for the correct S sound, followed by the T, which gets the tongue tip raised. Again, what you need for the S sound. And by doing this eat and lengthening the duration of the T sound, it turns into the correct S sound. So this eat, and when you lengthen the duration, it becomes eat, followed by the E, which again keeps the tongue in the correct position, and then followed again by the T, which in the old days, I used to use the word beat seek, but what I noticed was that a lot of students had difficulty doing this front T to back K, front T to back K. And so just to simplify it, I changed it to beat seat. So co-articulation, when we talk, we're constantly co-articulating. So it's important to practice while co-articulating, as opposed to just doing single words, which start with our target sound. So in SATPAC, the target sound will always be in this position 3, which is post-vocalic, or position 4, which is pre-vocalic. So you're always co-articulating as you're practicing, which is going to lead into quicker transfer into conversational speech. Okay. A non-SATPAC way that I use this co-articulation is these are typically 4 or 5-year-olds who don't have S clusters. So these pictures are all SP: spill, spoon, spot, spade, spark. And this comes from the Spark or revised book, which has a lot of really good pictures in it that are really good for drill. Anyway, so instead of having the student go spill like that, where they can set their articulators in the correct position, I make it more challenging and use co-articulation. So what they do is they start with ah, mouth open, ah, spill, ah, spoon. And this is much more difficult. But once they get it, then again, it's going to lead into quicker transfer. Normal rate. So if I had to pick the one thing that most speech therapists are doing incorrectly, is they're not working at a normal rate. They're having the kids practice slowly. And let me just share with you a story from early in my career. Right now, this is my 42nd year as an SLP, but this was early in my career, and I had a group of 2 boys, and we were practicing the S sound, and it was going like this. I would model, I like soup, and they would go, I like soup. And these kids all have lisps, both of these kids. And then all of a sudden, the bell rang, and one of the kids got really excited. He said, oh, time for recess. See you later, Mr. Sachs. So what we notice here is that there's a disconnect between what I was doing in therapy versus the way that they would normally speak. And so what I'm saying is you gotta work at a normal rate. And so that's also not to say that you have to begin at a normal rate, because you really can't. The kids don't have the motor skills to be doing that. But in the back of your mind, you need to keep with the idea that, okay, we're working slowly now, but eventually we're going to be working at a normal rate. And what I do is I use a metronome to have kids practice at a normal rate on the SATPAC list. So this is something called Pro Metronome. And what I figured out was that 140 beats per minute is a slow, normal conversational rate. And it sounds like this. me put on my phone here. So the way you would use this would be in the practice phase, you would be going like this. See, I'm going to be both the student and the SLP. So it would be like this. Beat seat, 1, 2, 3, 4. Mid seat, 1, 2, 3. Wait seat, 1, 2, 3, 4. Like that. And that's how you know that your student is practicing at a normal rate. Okay. So here's an example of a student that was right at the end of her therapy. And we were working on L clusters. And what I often used to do was write these kind of ridiculous stories that would have lots of the students' target sound. And as the student would repeat these stories over and over again, pretty soon they would memorize the story. And so I believe this was a 3-paragraph story. And what she is going to do is the first paragraph, which she has memorized. But what I want you to pay attention to is notice as she's telling the story how normal her conversational rate sounds.
This is a story about Clem the clown. Clem liked to stick his fingers together with glue to make people clap and laugh. One day, Clem used super glue. He picked up some gloves and they stuck to his fingers. He used a flagpole to unstick the gloves and that stuck too. It looked so funny that everyone watching Clem clapped and laughed.
Okay. So once again, I want to remind you that as any questions come up along the way, to type them into the Q&A box, because that's what I'll answer at the end of the presentation. So yeah, and I hope you noticed that it sounded like she was speaking at a very normal rate. Natural prosody. So when we speak in conversation, we use natural prosody. So studies have shown that if you're using natural prosody in your therapy, that it's going to lead to quicker transfer into conversational speech. So this is list 6 in the practice phase in the SATPAC program. And the way it works is I model for the student. So I say, a boy bought a new beat seat. And the student repeats, a boy bought a new beat seat. Okay. Then I ask questions which are incorrect, and whichever word that I say that's incorrect, the student will correct it and put the emphasis on that word. So I asked, I bought a new beat seat? And the student goes, no, a boy bought a new beat seat. I ask, a boy sold a new beat seat? And they go, no, a boy bought a new beat seat. So I think you get the idea here. But what's interesting about this technique is that it's virtually never done in typical speech therapy, because what I'm doing besides using natural prosody is I'm having the student take the stress off the target sound. In a typical speech session, it would sound like this. A boy bought a new beat seat, like that, where the student would exaggerate the target sound and also say it longer and more emphasis, and it's just not very natural. So by using this technique, it's really powerful and it speeds up the remediation process. Non-words. So over the years, I've had many SLPs say, I really don't like non-words. So, I'm really not interested in your program. Okay, so that's fine. You can not like non-words, but the reality is that non-words are going to lead to quicker remediation at first. So why is that? It's because you can make minimal changes from word to word that you would not be able to do with non-words. So, for example, we're working on the S sound, and the student has a lisp, okay? So in list 1, every word would have seat, T-S-E-E-T, and the changes would take place in position 1 and 2 and away from the S sound. So the words I would model would be words like beat seat, mid seat, weight seat, fit seat, fat seat, tut seat, like that. And what's happening is the student over and over and over is saying this correct S sound. So they're going this seat, seat, seat. And what you're doing is you're establishing a correct motor pattern, or you're practicing a correct motor pattern if they've already established it correctly. So, and then you can do this in a very systematic way. So when we get to list 2, what happens is now the changes take place after the S sound, which is more difficult, even though in your traditional speech therapy, the typical starting place would be with some picture cards that begin with S words, sock, soap, like that. Okay, so now we're making systematic words which have the vowel and the consonant after the S sound. So it'd be words like beat seed, beat sage, beat sop, like that. Okay. Also, there's no negative associations with words like beet seed and ear gap or ear now. And if you think about it, let's say you're working with an 8-year-old who has a lisp. Well, how many times in this kid's life has he incorrectly said the word soap by going soap? So let's talk about sensory feedback. So the kid's sensory feedback, tactily, he's going to be feeling his tongue between his teeth. And for him, that feels correct. Okay. He's going to be hearing soap, and the way that sounds to him is correct, etc. So you get the idea. So you don't have to deal with this competing negative sensory feedback that the kid has developed over his lifetime by using nonsense words. And the third reason is because nonsense words are more complex. And if you're familiar with the complexity approach, it says that when you switch from the non-words back into the real words, that at that point, it's going to be way easier for the student because they're not having to think anymore about what did that guy say? I don't know. I don't know what, but it's beat sage. I mean, that's difficult. So anyway, that's the reason that we use non-words in SATPAC. Therapy response rate. What that means is that you get lots and lots and lots of correct repetitions of the target sound in a speech session. Whoops, forgot to turn my phone off. Okay, so let's go back to Fresno State now. Here I am as an undergraduate, and I'm in this class, and the professor says, in a good therapy session, you should get 500 correct target sounds. So I was in my first or second year, and I really didn't know anything. But when she said that, I went out loud. I said, 500, that's impossible. And she said, no, it's not impossible. So I was thinking about, a typical school session where you might have 3 kids in a group and you're working for a half an hour session where what she did is she had a private practice and she used to work with her kids individually for hour sessions. Okay, so in that case, 500 correct responses is not impossible. However, there's probably about 5 to 10 things that I remembered from my undergraduate therapy, undergraduate schooling that were important in my career. And this was one of them because it always stuck with me that it was really important to get lots and lots of correct responses. And right after I developed the SATPAC program, I was saying to myself, wow, I'm getting like twice as many responses as I used to get. This is really awesome. So here's an example from the SATPAC program. This is in the generalization transfer phase, and there are contrastive stress sentences. So, like what I did with that list 6 earlier, I do the same thing with these sentences. And again, I try to take the emphasis off the target sound, but because there's so many S's in these sentences, that's not always possible. So it goes like this. I say, Grace has a soft whisper. And they go, Grace has a soft whisper. I ask, Bill has a soft whisper? They go, no, Grace has a soft whisper. Then I ask Sam, or I say, Sam never cleans his cups. And they repeat, Sam never cleans his cups. Then I ask, Sam always cleans his cups. They go, no, Sam never cleans his cups. So through the years, what I noticed was that exercise that I just showed you took about 15 seconds. And in that 15 seconds, my student made 16 correct S sounds. So you really get a lot of bang from your buck by using this technique, and you get lots and lots and lots of repetitions. So the way I work is that, or I should preface that I just retired. So the way I used to work was most of my Arctic kids that I used to see, I would do RTI, which I hope you're familiar with, but it stands for response to intervention, where these kids are not in the special ed process, but you're working with them before special education to see if they will respond positively. And that way you can keep them out of the special education process. And so as I was doing this for the last 15 years or so of my career, I was keeping about 2/3 of my Arctic kids out of special education by doing this really systematic RTI that were mostly R's and S's, and they didn't need formal speech therapy after we did this. Okay, so let's talk about the 3 phases of the SATPAC program. The first phase is the establishment phase. And the establishment phase is voluntary. You don't have to do this phase if it's not necessary. And typically, the way I would go about doing therapy, it was typically not necessary. And if you want to ask a question about that later, if it's not clear why it wasn't necessary for most of my kids, you can ask that. Anyway, in the establishment phase, there were 7 different steps, and I'll go over each one. What we're looking for is 95% correct accuracy, which is 19 out of 20 correct responses. If you get to number 4 and they don't get to 95%, you don't go back to number 1. You just stay on number 4. And the idea of the establishment phase is it was meant to be done quickly. And when I have used it, it would typically be like 1 or 2 sessions, and that's it. Okay, here we go. Bisyllable word slowly. This would be sort of like a robotic sound where everything is drawn out. So it's be, seat, like that. Number 2, just the target phone is prolonged. So it's beat, seat, beat, seat. 3, equal stress on the syllables. And that would be a pretty natural sounding beat, seat, beat, seat. 4, stress on the syllable containing the target sound. And that would be beat, seat, beat, seat. And 5 is just the reverse. Beat, seat, beat, seat. So right from the beginning, you're taking the stress off the target sound, which again leads to quicker transfer. Then there are phrases and sentences. And on the phrases, each one is said 5 times each. And again, you're taking the stress off the target sound. So number 1, 5 times would be, I would say, pretend you're talking to your dog and you say, beat seat, no, beat seat, no, like that. Then 2, my beat seat, my beat seat. 3, it's, we would, in speech therapy, we would typically be sitting at a table. So I would tap the table. I'd say, pretend this is a beat seat. So it's on a beat seat, on a beat seat. 4, a beat seat 1, a beat seat 1. And then step 7 are the sentences that we used in the practice phase, list 6, but now what the student does is they say each sentence 5 times each. A boy bought a new beat seat. A boy bought a new beat seat. A boy bought a new beat seat. Like that. Okay. Any questions? Type it in the chat box. Okay. So this, if you've been kind of dozing in the first part, maybe you had a bad night's sleep last night and you're having trouble staying awake. Well, now it's time to really wake up, because this is the main guts of the SATPAC program. And I know there's a lot of university students that are going to be using this program because I gave you the program for free at your university. So you might as well be using it, because it's proven to be, with peer-reviewed studies, as far as I know, the best way to do therapy there is. So anyway, this is what the program looks like, and I'll explain it to you. So whichever phase of the program that you're in, it will show up darker on your screen. And you can use SATPAC on any device. I've typically used it on computers, but you can use it on tablets or phones, whatever you want. Okay. So your seed word, which is your facilitating context word, is going to go in this box. Some other features of SATPAC: you can exclude any sounds that you want from your lists. And this is really, really helpful, because when you're doing your lists, what you want your students to be doing is saying the words rapidly and not making mistakes and not having to think about anything other than saying the target sound correctly. So if the kid can't say the R sound, you get rid of it. Okay. I think that's all I'll talk about here. But anyway, in the seed word box, there's these 3 lines. You click on the 3 lines, then a Dropbox box appears, and I have made suggestions for facilitating contexts, non-words, that you're free to use by just clicking on the word and I did this for every word, every error sound, and lots of different phonological processes. Okay. And so, like I said, you can exclude sounds. So in this case, we have our seed word in here, which is beat seat. Okay. And the kid has a lisp, so he would typically say beat seat. So we exclude the TH sounds, because the TH sounds are going to interfere with the target sound S, because we don't want him to be practicing sticking his tongue out, particularly against S context, because if the word is beat feet, he's going to go beat feet like that. So we exclude the TH sound. We also, in this case, exclude the R sound because the student does not have the R sound in their repertoire yet. So again, we don't want them making mistakes in SATPAC, so we get rid of those sounds. Then we hit this create list button. And as we do the SATPAC words, what we're looking for is 80% accuracy on the first 5 lists at 140 beats per minute. And that's the only time that you would be using the metronome is on the first 5 lists of the practice phase. Okay. And then when we get to list 6, which are those sentences, boy bought a new beat seat, what we're listening for is 80% accuracy, but at a normal conversational rate. So for example, if it's going like this, a boy bought a new beat seat. They go, a boy bought a new beat seat. And then I ask, I bought a new beat seat? And the student goes, no, a boy bought a new beat seat. Okay, so that's giving you some valuable feedback in that the student is going slower on the target sound. So at that point, you need to determine, is it that the student doesn't have the motor skills to be saying that correctly in sentences, or is it that it just needs to be called to the student's attention, which is what I do. I say, okay, listen, this is what you said. A boy bought a new beat seat. Now, did that sound like natural conversation, the way you said it? The kid will think and say, no, I slowed down on the S sound. Right, very good. You slowed down on the S sound. So let's try it again. And let's see if you can go normal speed on that beat seat, okay? So again, it's, I bought a new beat seat. And the student goes, no, a boy bought a new beat seat. Wow, that was awesome. You said it at a normal speed that time. Really good. Let's see if you can keep doing that. Okay. Or he might have gone, no, a boy bought a new beat seat. And then I know that, okay, for right now, that's the speed that he needs to go. But what we're going to do is keep repeating and repeating these sentences. And eventually, the student is going to speed up. So these are your lists, your very systematic lists. So I assume my students who are watching that, you're all familiar with the vowel circle and the place and manner chart. And if you're not, type into the box that you're not familiar with it. And Well, actually, let's not do that because I want to make sure we have enough time later for questions. But if you would like me to explain that later, I will. Anyway, in list 1, like I said, the changes take place away from the S sound. So they're all taking place in positions 1 and 2. And we're using systematic vowels in that we follow the vowel circle, in this case from front to back, E, A, etc., till we get to the back, which is oo, okay? And from that point, we cycle back to the front, ooh, ooh, oh, like that, okay? And we do the consonants systematically, in this case, starting in the front with the B sound. And you can see how we're moving toward the back of the mouth with the tongue. Okay. Now, in list 2, as I said earlier, now the changes take place after the S sound, which is more difficult. And so you have, again, systematic vowels, and again, systematic consonants. And when you get to the end of the consonants, which in this case is the NG, then you jump back to this sound and start going towards the front of the mouth, where we've gone towards the back of the mouth. Now we're moving towards the front of the mouth. Okay. List 3. List 3 is just a combination of lists 1 and 2, where every other word is beats, 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 or every other word is seed, 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 like that. So through the first 3 lists, we've had this abutting T sound against the S sound. And why have we done that? Because the T sound facilitates this correct S sound. Now, when they're able to get past list 3, now at list 4, they're able to make the S sound against any consonant context. So again, we would start in the lingua alveolar position with TD, CHJ, and L, like that, which again, we're being systematic. And we would move towards the back of the mouth. List 5. List 5 has systematic vowels front to back. We have the target sound, and it's abutting against random sounds. So there's a lot of different contexts, which tends to make this a difficult list. But for the S sound, it's really not too bad. For the R sound, it's really difficult. So it would sound like this. imse, ainse, fse, afse, like that. And again, you would use the metronome at 140 beats per minute, and 80% means that they can miss 4 and proceed to the next list. What happened here? Okay, and then they would go to list 6, which we've already talked about. Okay, then you can't see it over here, but remember that the practice phase was this area on top, which had been darker. Now we're going to go to the generalization transfer phase. So you click on it, and now this becomes darker. Okay. And you get, this is what the phase looks like. There's all these choices that you can make. So in our case, what we're going to choose is the prefocalic and postfocalic target phones S and Z, list 1, because there's so many kids who work on S's and C's. I also created, if they get bored working on the list 1, then you can go to list 2, which have new stimuli there, new phrases, short sentences, and sentences. Okay, so at this point, I have my students use a tally counter when they're saying their target sounds. So you may be wondering, why do they use a tally counter? So years ago, and this was in my post-oral motor days, where I felt like I could remediate anybody, but I was still humble enough to go to workshops and feel like I could still learn things from other people. And that's exactly what happened here, is that the presenter was talking about having the student use a metronome when they're saying their target sound, because many times when they're speaking, they actually don't realize that they're saying their target sound. And I didn't really believe this person, but she seemed to know her stuff. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try using a tally counter. And so there's also now tally counter apps that you can use on your smartphone. So to test this out, I used the SATPAC generalization transfer phases. And so I would say, okay, we're going to start using a tally counter, and I want you to push on every one of your S sounds. So it goes like this: soft whisper. And they would go soft. I say, no, you got to push right when you're saying your target. So it's like this: soft whisper. And they would go soft whisper. I'd say, good, that was really good. You got it. And you notice what the student did is that they had to slow down in order to think about where is my target sound. So eventually what happens is, with lots of practice, is that the student will speed up. Okay? And again, these are short sentences. And again, you can use that contrastive stress technique and do the sentences like, she had, okay, and I'm doing this too, she had a soft whisper. And the student goes, she had a soft whisper. And then I say, she has a soft whisper. And they go, no, she had a soft whisper, like that. And actually, at this point, if they're going pretty well, then you can lose the tally counter, because that adds a variable that makes this much more difficult. As you noticed, I had problems with it the first time I was doing this for you. So anyway, you so much of speech therapy is using your professional judgment. So you need to be doing that. And my professional judgment after I made this mistake is, whoa, this is going to be too hard for my kids. So I'm going to lose the tally counter. And then we have longer sentences, which is what we used earlier to do that contrastive stress technique. Okay. Then what we do is we bring back the difficult sound that the student might have had difficulty contrasting, in this case, the THs. And we have contrasting THS for phrases, short sentences, and longer sentences. And so if you're modeling the singer sang both songs, and the student can go, the singer sang both songs, then the odds are that this kid is probably remediated. If not, and you're done, because this is the end of the SATPAC program. What I used to do at this point, if they weren't remediated, I would have them bring in their reading books, and we would talk about their stories, and they would be monitoring their target sounds. So I would ask questions about, okay, so why did the guy do that? And then they said, well, it was because he was in the water. And you get the idea that they're monitoring their S's as they're having to think and use conversational speech, which is difficult, and that really helps them transfer into normal conversation. Okay, so like I said, that's the end of the SATPAC program. But there's also 2 supplements, and this is one of them, CV lists for childhood apraxia of speech. And you can see that now this one is highlighted. Okay, so how this came about was, at the time that we were doing the SATPAC revision, I was doing preschool assessments, and I was really shocked by how many 3-year-olds that were transitioning into the IEP process had really, really severe apraxia. And they could do things like mama, but they couldn't do things like mommy. So what I did was I developed this this systematic program for childhood apraxia of speech. Okay, and so this might be a typical student where the only sounds that they had were the P, B, M, W, T, D, and N. So you can see that I've excluded all the other sounds. You then hit the create list button and you get these systematic reduplicated words. So you're modeling BB, Mima, Way, Dada, etc. So typically, these are kids who don't talk very much. And the reason they don't talk much is because people can't understand them. And if that were me, I wouldn't talk very much either. So what happens now is I've set up a system where they're going to be doing 100% accuracy because I've excluded all their error sounds and I'm doing reduplications with them, which they can do. So when I do this list with them, it kind of shakes up their brain in that, they're thinking, well, maybe I'm better than I thought. Maybe I can do more. So we get to list 2. Now we have the systematic consonant sounds, but now we have random vowel sounds. So this is where they're going to struggle. So I say, bo, boo, and they go, maybe, bo, bo. Okay. And so anyway, what I would do with them is, let's do number 2. I would say, mo, me, and they would go, mo, let's say. So I'd say, okay, you got part of that right, but watch me. It's mo, you say it. And they go, mo, good, you got it. Now, the next part you're going to do with a big smile, watch me. And they go, me, great, you got it. Now, let's put these 2 together. You're going to go round and then smile. Watch, mo, me. You do it. And they go, mo, me. Good, you got it. And so they typically will pick this up without too much trouble. And then you go back to the systematic vowel sounds. And you have random consonant sounds. And because these are consonants that they can say, they typically do this pretty fast too. And at this point, what happens with these kids is they begin to talk and people can understand them. So I'm going to give you a made-up example of what I'm talking about. My student has not been talking much, but now my student is with his mom and his baby sister, and the mother gives the baby a piece of strawberry. Okay, let's say this kid is a year and a half or two, whatever's age appropriate for strawberries. I don't know what it is. Anyway, so my student watches and says, and these are all CVs or less, "Whoa, mommy, baby eat tabe." Okay, so in context, you should have been able to understand, look, mommy, baby eat strawberry. Okay, and at this point now, the mother can understand the kid and can start doing appropriate language back and say, yeah, the baby is eating the strawberry, modeling a correct sentence and things like that. So at this point, the student's speech and language starts exploding. And what I've noticed is because the student starts to talk a lot, these incorrect sounds right here start developing naturally in their repertoire. So if you want to, you can go back and create new lists incorporating these sounds that are now in their repertoire. Okay, so an unintended consequence of this is that it works well with phonological processes. So in this case, for a kid who fronts, I've eliminated all the sounds except for TD, K, and G. And when you get to list 3, you start getting back to front, 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 front to back contrast. So these lists are really good practice for kids who don't have apraxia, but they need to contrast their back to front and front to back contrast. Okay, so here's some other essentials that I think you need for speech therapy. Then we'll take after I finish this, we'll take a quick 5-minute break, and then I'll come back and answer your questions. Okay, these 6 things I think are also necessary for good speech therapy. A solid foundation. You would never think about having a house built without a solid foundation. And that's what you need in speech. And before I took oral motor classes, I didn't know what a solid foundation was. And so for the S sound, I used to say to my kids, okay, just close your teeth and that way you're not going to lisp. Okay, so you can start talking like this. And I would say, yeah, that's good, you got it. And then when we got to conversational speech, they would revert back to their lisp and I wouldn't know why. And it was because we had not developed this correct foundation of eat with a sides of the tongue, stabilized on the back molars. Okay. Practice is critically important. And I said that we're looking for lots and lots of repetitions. So there's basically two types of feedback. When the student gives a response, you can say something like good or correct, which is knowledge of results, or you can give knowledge of performance, where you can say, good, you kept your tongue wide and on your back teeth. So, and this all relates to metacognition, which I'm not going to talk about today, but if you want to take my 3-hour workshops, I talk a lot about metacognition. The 3-hour workshops are for CEUs where this is not. Okay, so see if you think she's doing a good job, the SLP here, in giving feedback.
Earla,
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 earsha,
earsha,
earya,
earya,
earca.
earca,
Good. Earga.
earga,
Good. Earha.
earha,
Earna.
earna,
Earja.
earja,
Earcha.
earcha.
Okay, so you were supposed to think, no, she's not doing a very good job because she only a couple of times said good. That was her only feedback. And when the student made an error, she didn't say anything, and she needed to help that student correct. And so the student will go, yeah, cha, and the SLP doesn't say anything. So she's thinking, okay, I got it. And so to speed up the process, you need to give really good feedback of when they're doing a good job.
Earza.
Earza,
For some reason.
earna,
Okay, so I believe in my computer is messing up. If you're wondering why these weird things are happening, it's like it's delayed. The response is delayed, and it's not going back. Okay, I'm gonna have to stop and go back. Okay, here we go. It went back. Okay, here we go. Mandatory homework. So I'm a huge believer in mandatory homework. However, I don't require kids to bring their homework back. And also, the reason I'm a big believer is because let's say your typical student is in a group for therapy 30 minutes a week without any homework. He's going to be spending 0.5% of his waking time working on homework or working on his speech, and that's not enough. So just asking for 5 or 10 minutes a day can really make a big difference, I've found. Okay, and in SATPAC, you have a little place here where you can talk to the parents and get their email and then email this home. Okay. Systematic therapy, I think I've talked about that a lot. Following a hierarchy is important. So again, let's say you're starting with S, and the student is doing really well. And after they did list 2, where the changes take place after the S sound, then here's some S pictures. You might try going from SATPAC into real pictures. Let me backtrack a little bit here, okay? So my goal in speech therapy is to remediate my students as quickly as possible. My goal is never to go through the SATPAC program from start to finish. So what I do in therapy is I jump around using my professional judgment, which you guys need to do too, okay? And even if you're just starting, you need to be using your professional judgment, and then you'll make mistakes and you'll say, okay, my professional judgment was wrong. Okay, but I do that all the time. I still do that. And so I'm thinking, okay, they got beats H, beats Z, so they're doing a good job after the S sound. Let's try something here. Okay, so I asked my student, okay, say these after me. Beat sit. They go, beat sit, good. Beat sand. They go, beat sand, good. Beat sock. Good, they got it. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to forget the nonsense words because they're using real words in a context. And I'm going to say, okay, let's make it a little more difficult. Let's try beat seat. Okay, and they get it. Then I say, okay, let's try, let's see. Let's try sit with the TS, sand, sock, and they get that. And then I say, okay, now let's get rid of that T sound. You're gonna go sit, sand, sock. Good, okay. And I think you get the idea here is that you go from simpler to more complex. And the idea is to remediate these kids as quickly as possible. Okay, change happens over time. And what that means, just to speed things up a little bit, I had these 2 kids that I worked with that were in 4th grade that were on my son's Little League team. And they'd spent years in speech therapy. And I worked with them over the summer, 5 or 6 individual sessions. And they were then done with speech and were using their R's in conversational speech. And the reason that happened was because I worked with them individually. I used the SATPAC program. The parents could see what I was doing. They would work on that diligently for homework. And they would practice, and the kids picked up this consistent motor pattern. And that was it. So let's take a 5-minute break right now. It's 11:24. We'll come back at 11:29. I'll do a little bit of oral motor information, and then I'll answer your questions. Okay, we're back. Okay, let's talk about oral motor skills as a SATPAC precursor. So what happened in my career was for the first 10 years or so, I thought I was pretty good at remediating speech sounds, but there was something missing because a lot of kids I wasn't able to help. And then this was in the 80s. And then in the 90s, the oral motor started becoming a big thing in our profession. And so I went to an oral motor workshop, and it was like my eyes just bugged open. I thought, wow, this is amazing. Why didn't they teach us this stuff in school? And I was just stunned by how important this stuff was for remediation. So, long story short, after I took a bunch of oral motor courses, I felt like I could remediate anybody. And, that's pretty much been my success rate. I mean, there's some kids that never practice and are just not interested. But prior to oral motor, that was kind of my MO. It's like I was kind of in the blaming phase of therapy, If they weren't remediated, it was their fault, not mine. And what I realized was that a lot of the time it was my fault, not their fault. So anyway, oral motor, okay. Now that's like a dirty word in our profession. The question is, by putting your face in all these weird positions, does it do anything for speech? Anything positive? And the typical reading in our profession is that there's no evidence of any benefit. ASHA hasn't been an advocate. And there's a guy named Gregory Love who's written numerous articles about oral motor, basically saying it's a bunch of bunk. Okay, so this is my 43rd year as a speech therapist. I've never been a professor, and all I've done is work with kids on their speech. And what I can tell you is that I learned so much from oral motor that it completely changed my career. Now, this comes with a caveat, okay? Oral motor, what's been valuable for me is placement, okay? And principles. And so what happened is I learned a bunch of important principles that I never learned in college, and that the whole point of oral motor is getting correct placement. Okay. And that has what's been extremely helpful. So here's an example of what you should not do with oral motor. That at one point in my career, I was doing evaluations at various schools, and one of the SLPs who I checked in with was right about to do an oral motor group with her students. So she had about 5 kids, and they were sitting around a kidney-shaped table, and each kid had a baggie full of straws, balloons, horns, things like that. And so first thing she did was, with her kids, she said, okay, let's do this. And I'm thinking to myself, what does that have to do with remediating any specific sound? And the answer is it doesn't. And so I would not do that exercise unless there was a specific purpose for a specific sound. Okay. Now, what I did learn, and I'm not sure if I learned this from another therapist or I made it up myself, but it's been the greatest oral motor placement technique that I've ever learned. And I've also written about it in peer-reviewed articles. But this is an oral motor placement exercise for the S sound, that what happens typically with kids who lisp is I ask them to say, okay, do this, go E. And what they need to do is keep their tongues stabilized on the back molars and just move the tongue tip, because that's what I do. Watch. E, E. And what most of them do is this. They go like this. E, like that. Okay. Where they're not stabilizing their tongue. And if they can't do this correct eat, then they're not going to be able to do the correct S, eats or eats. Okay. And so that's where oral motor has been really valuable in certain exercises which may not involve speech. And you're probably saying to yourself, well, how does that not involve speech? Because what I ask my students to do are EPOPs. And this is the thing that I don't know if I made it up or I stole it from somebody else, but they go E, 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 E. And I actually have them biting down on infant tongue depressors while they're doing this. So it's E, E, like that. The reason I'm having them bite is because I want their jaws to be stable, not going E, E, E. Okay. And then after they do this E, this E pop, E, what they do is they learn to make this transition from the E to the, where they're keeping their tongue stabilized on the back molars. They go from there to E, and then finally into this E, like that. So I hope that's clear. Okay, so there's also a whole bunch of oral motor principles, and the two most really important are stabilization and separation. But well, let's take a poll. Okay, should I talk about stabilization or separation? Should I talk about, all of a sudden my mouth stopped working. Should I talk about oral stabilization and oral separation? Or should I just go into the questions? So if you want just questions, type in Q. If you want the stabilization and separation, type in OM for oral motor. So to repeat, Q for me answering questions, OM for me talking about stabilization and separation. There's 40 of you online, and I've only gotten about 17 responses. It says Susan raised hand. I don't know what that means. So, Susan, why don't you type your question in? You can type your question in, Susan, right now. Okay, well, I didn't get it. But anyway, the majority of you said oral motor. So I'll talk about stabilization and separation. It'll only take a couple of minutes. Because these are really critical. In oral stabilization, your goal in speech is to be to stabilize. You need to achieve a refined small muscle movement by stabilizing a non-moving part near the moving part. So that means that for your tongue sounds, you're stabilizing your tongue on the back molars for every tongue sound in speech, except for TH and L. And I never learned that in school. And I thought, this is so basic. We should have been taught that in school. So you're stabilizing your tongue on the back molars for every tongue sound, except for TH and L. Okay. I want you to say this sentence with your eyes closed and pay attention to what your tongue is doing, okay? Close your eyes and say 3 times, Candy eats a green snake. Okay, so the first time I did something like that in an oral motor workshop, I was astounded that my tongue was barely moving. I was getting little blips in the front, little lifts in the back, but my tongue was basically still in my mouth. And contrast that to kids who can't say the R sound. They go like this with their tongue, ear. They go eel, and they drop their tongue. The kids who lisp go yes, and they push their whole tongue forward. So stabilization is critical. Okay, separation, when babies are born, their articulators, they use them all together for breastfeeding. They round their lips, they stick out their tongue, and they close their jaw like that. Okay, over time, they're supposed to be able to separate those articulatory movements, but many of our speech kids can't. So, for example, you have a kid who fronts and you say, okay, say car, and they go, tar. Okay, I say, watch me. You're going to keep your mouth open and say, why do I keep my mouth open? Say, car. And they go, tar. Okay, so why does this happen? Because they don't have that separation between their jaw and their tongue. And so their typical way to say car would be tar. So when either the jaw starts to close or the tongue starts to come forward, they work together and they say tar. Okay, let's move into the questions now. Okay, questions. By the way, I was impressed with your questions. When you're doing the metronome work, do you say the word or does the student say it? Okay, so I didn't make that clear. What you do is you model. I'll slow it down, but you get the idea. Beat, seed, and then the student goes, beat, seed. And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I model mit, seed. I'll do it faster now. Mit, seed, mit, seed. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wait, seed, wait, seed. 1, 2, 3. Like that. Okay. What do you recommend for session length? In my school career, when the students were on IEPs, I would do 25-minute sessions with no more than 2 students in the group. And like I said, the last 15 years of my school career, excuse me, I was doing RTI for most of my kids, and that was individual 15-minute sessions. Question, how would you best incorporate the tenets of this program in a group therapy setting where a clinician might be seeing 4 or 5 students who all possess different speech and language difficulties? Okay, that's a really, really good question. And first of all, I would say, from my experience, it's impossible to do effective therapy with 5 kids in a group in, 30-minute session, particularly. So with my skill level, which was maybe a little bit limited and discipline or whatever, but I could never work with a group more than 2 kids successfully, because when I had 2 kids, I could work with them without any problem with discipline issues. When I got more than that, then I had problems. So anyway, that was my solution. And I did that for the last 15 years of my career. So it could be done. And if you have caseloads of 80 or more, you got to talk to your supervisors and say, okay, number one, I need to start working with my kids RTI for 15 minutes individually. And there's no way that, you can even use me as an example. You can say, I just went to a workshop with this, I don't know if I mentioned this, but in 2011, in the United States, there was one award given to school speech therapists, and that was me. I got that award out of all the SLPs in the United States. So you can use that as a leverage point and say, I just went to a workshop with this guy that was the only SLP in the country and he says that you can't win. You know what? For some reason, there's gardeners right here. Let me see if I can lose them. Okay, hang on. Okay, sorry about that. We have our gardeners that come typically between 10 and 12, and I wrote to them, do not come between 10 and 12, and they came between 10 and 12. Anyway, so I had, in my 42-year career in the schools, there was only 1 year where I had 80 students or more. And that was the most depressing year of my career because I felt like I was ineffective, and I changed schools after that because you can't successfully work with that many kids. And, ASHA recommends something like 45. And in my state, California, there's supposed to be a law that the average caseload should be 55. So, you got to talk to your supervisors, and because you want to be effective. What was your criteria for moving a student from RTI to an IEP? Great question. So what I had heard about RTI was, well, let's see if they respond to the intervention. So let's give them 6 weeks of speech therapy. I thought, this is baloney. You can't remediate a kid in 6 weeks of speech therapy. So what I would do is I would work with them. They would either be remediated after a year of RTI, which would be 7.5 hours, giving them 30 sessions of 15 minutes, or they would be remediated before that, because in my studies, I've seen that the average is about 5 hours. Or if I would see that they're not making progress, or we get to the end of the year and they haven't made progress, then I would recommend an IEP for them. How do you pronounce the difference between, in my the SATPAC list, there were these two little O's and there were two big O's. The little O's are as in foot. The big O's are ooh as in boot. Okay, another really excellent question here. How do you help parents, families, and conversational partners get that 5 to 10 minutes a day with busy schedules and competing priorities, etc.? Okay, so here's what I did, is that I would, when they weren't making progress, I would call the parents and I would say, hi, I'm Mr. Sachs and I'm your kid's speech therapist. And what I'm noticing is they're not making any progress. And so I wanted to check in with you. Every Tuesday, I send home a paper, which I would like you to practice for 5 to 10 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week. Are you getting that paper? And I would say about 80% would say no. So at that point, I would ask for their email address. And I spent my career working in low SES schools, and most all parents still had emails, or I could text them because they all had smartphones, and tell them basically what they should be doing or what to look for. That, look in your kid's backpack today, because I just sent a paper. Anyway, So I would do that. And then maybe a month or two later, if there was no change, I would look for some alternative way. I would look for a sibling, older sibling that goes to the school, and I would pull them in. And I would say, okay, how would you feel about working with your younger brother? And if you do it, like every 2 months, I'm going to give you a prize. I can give you a voucher for going to fast food, or, I have this price box and you can pull something out of it. Then if that didn't work, I would, oftentimes there were aides at the school that I would talk to, and I'd say, can you spend 5 minutes with this kid doing this? Anyway, that's what I would do. And I found that virtually all the kids I worked with made progress, were remediated. Because I shifted schools, sometimes I wasn't able to follow them all the way through. And how does one purchase or rent the program? Okay, so that's a really good question too. So what happened was, I'm winding down my career after 41 years, and I've had the SATPAC out as a program to the general public for 20 years. And my goal when I started this was that I was seeing that as a profession, that we are not doing good therapy. And I saw lots of that in my districts that I worked in. And so my goal was, and people, you might think that this is stupid or unreachable or whatever, but I thought, I'm good at this. There's no reason. I'm not doing anything magical. There's no reason more people in our profession can't be doing this. So that was 20 years ago. There's 5,000 SATPAC users, which is good, but there's 150,000 people in our profession who are not using it. So at that point, SATPAC was only selling for $199. So I cut the price in half to 100, which is where the price is going to stay. And I incorporated a subscription. So you can get a $20 subscription for a year. And if you're finding that it's not helping you, I'll give you your money back. So my goal is to get lots and lots of more people using SATPAC. So anyway, and if you have any questions about anything that we talked about or about the SATPAC program, feel free to email me, because I'm now retired. I do some private practice, which is what I've done is kind of put the word out among SLPs in this country, and I'm getting referrals from all over the country, with difficult, mostly our kids. But anyway, I'm really happy you're a student, you're having problems. Feel free to email me. I feel like this is my job right now, to be a mentor. So let's see. Oh, there's more questions. Okay, sorry. Let's finish the questions and we'll be done. For the RSON, with a facilitating context or seat word differ depending if the student is using a bunched versus a retroflexed tongue position? Another really good question. So one of the things I learned in oral motor that I told you about was that the articulators need to be stabilized and in close range to a corresponding articulatory movement. So what that means is that I exclusively use the back R, because the back R is just this, and the retroflex is like that. It's much more economical to be doing a back R. Now, with that said, in real life, people don't exclusively use a classical retroflex R, but they do kind of things in between. So what I do is I use my professional judgment to decide on. I encourage everybody to use back R, but if it's not happening, then I might work with things like tongue up stuff. But basically 95 to 100% of people I work with use a back R and they get it. Okay. What do you do with a child who can produce a T and T, but will lisp the S? Okay, so if they can do this, if they can go say eat, wow, that's awesome. Okay, from there we go to, and this is why the establishment phase is optional, because we go eat, e, eat, e, 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 like that, hundreds and hundreds of times. And then we put it together, eat, and I have them say E separated. So it's, and they're doing it fast now. Eats, E, eats, E, eats, E, eats, E. Because if I ask them to say eatsy, they're going to go, oh, but they eatsy. Okay, so it's eatsy, eatsy. And they're saying it really fast. So it sounds like eatsy, but in their minds, they're saying eats, E. Okay, and from there, we go to beatsy, 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 beatsy. And from there, we go to beats, eat, beats, eat, beats, eat, beats, eat. And you can see why we're skipping the establishment phase, because by doing all this, we're really establishing the S sound. And from there, we go into list one, beat seat, mid seat, wait seat. So with thousands of correct repetitions, they learn this correct oral motor pattern, and then they won't be lisping. And if they do, then you call it to their attention. But my experience is that, you know, by using this technique, they're going to get it. Okay. Do you do a session with more emphasis on the multimodal approach to treating R? Okay, so here's what my plans are this year, is that I did this just to introduce particularly university students who are going to be using the SATPAC program this year, how to use it. But for others, and university students are certainly invited, I'm going to be doing 3-hour ASHA CEU presentations on everything. And one of my presentations will be about 2 hours on the R sound. So that should be really, really helpful, because R is by far the hardest sound. does the SATPAC program work for final R or just pre-vocalic R? So it works for all R's. Could I work with bilingual children using the same technique? For example, Spanish to English. So that's a really interesting question. Our district, First Unified, was using SATPAC years ago, and the Office of Civil Rights came in and said, how are you meeting the needs of your non-English speaking kids? And our supervisor answered, we're using SATPAC, which involves non-English words because they're nonsense words, and it remediates their speech without using English. So, okay, and then the question, last question, are we able to buy the program now? You go to satpac.com and there's the website. So anyway, that's it. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope that I see you again for my 3-hour presentations. Bye-bye.